I eventually told him that I thought it was about my sexuality, and he was super sweet about it.
On the set of Roseanne, everyone thought they understood Sarah Gilbert's life. She and Johnny Galecki played a couple on screen, dated off screen, and looked like Hollywood's safest young romance. But the truth was nothing like the image. Every time they kissed, she felt an emptiness she couldn't explain, a private signal that something in her life was about to break open. The revelation came quietly when she fell for someone no one would have expected. A woman 18 years older, respected, recognizable, and completely off limits if Sarah wanted to protect her future. No, what followed was a decade of secrecy so intense that even those closest to her never saw the cost. She hid the truth from Hollywood, from the press, and eventually from herself, convinced exposure would destroy everything she had built. And once the real reason she stayed silent is revealed, you will never look at Sarah Gilbert the same way again. The foundation of a pioneer. Sarah was born on January 29, 1975, at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, into a family that carried both the glow of Hollywood and the weight of things left unsaid. Her mother, Barbara Cowan, had moved through different professional identities over the years, adjusting her name to protect herself and her work. Her siblings, Melissa and Jonathan, were already tied to a history of performance and public attention, adopted by Paul Gilbert, a man whose death in 1976 was quietly labeled a stroke, even though the family knew it was a suicide. That secret, held in place for decades, created an early understanding for Sarah. In Hollywood, there was always a version of the story that stayed inside the home and another that was shown to everyone else. Growing up, she watched Melissa become a national figure on Little House on the Prairie, surrounded by expectations and relentless visibility. Sarah stood just outside that spotlight, learning how fame operated by observing it, rather than living inside it. That distance didn't make her feel left out. It made her pay attention. She saw the pressure, the constant demand to appear a certain way, and the toll it took on a family still navigating its own private grief. When she chose to take the Gilbert surname in 1984, it wasn't only an act of belonging, it was the first sign that she understood identity as something you could shape intentionally, especially in an industry that rarely gave people that choice. Her mother insisted on protecting her childhood, sending her to public school, limiting her early acting work, and giving her a life that felt grounded even when entertainment was always nearby. A Kool-Aid commercial at 6 and a TV movie role at 9 introduced her to the camera, but they never consumed her. What they did give her was a slow, steady entry into a world that often overwhelms children who enter it too fast. By the time she reached her early teens, Sarah had already developed a quiet awareness that set her apart. She understood how stories were edited, how careers rose and fell, and how easily a private truth could be hidden if the public version was more convenient. She watched these dynamics play out inside her own family long before she ever faced them as a professional actor. Those early lessons made her cautious, thoughtful, and unusually prepared for the pressures ahead. She didn't approach Hollywood chasing approval. She approached it wanting control over her path, her identity, and her voice. And that foundation matters. It explains why, years later, she pushed for realism in Roseanne, fought for honest conversations on the talk, and refused to let a single narrative define her. Long before she became a pioneer, Sarah Gilbert was a child learning how truth, identity, and image collide, and how much strength it takes to hold on to all three. When Darlene became the blueprint, Sarah Gilbert's rise began in 1988, but to understand why it mattered so much, the sequence leading up to it is essential. She had already experienced the industry from the sidelines, watching how fame shaped her sister's adolescence. So when she auditioned for Roseanne at age 13, she approached it with a caution most child actors didn't have. She had just been rejected from a planned reboot of The Facts of Life, a disappointment that could have pushed her away from acting entirely. Instead, It sharpened her sense of what kind of work she wanted. She wasn't looking for a glossy teen role or a character built on stereotypes. She wanted something real. Roseanne gave her exactly that. The moment she stepped into the role of Darlene Connor, she understood she wasn't playing a conventional TV daughter. Darlene was sarcastic, sharp, self-protective, and unwilling to soften her edges to fit the expectations of network television. That portrayal immediately resonated with audiences because it reflected a version of American girlhood that had rarely been shown honestly on screen. Viewers saw a teenager who didn't perform femininity to earn approval, who pushed back on authority without being written as a problem child, and who used humor as a shield when life felt unstable. In the context of late 1980s sitcoms, that was quietly revolutionary. As the show grew, Sarah's influence grew with it. She wasn't content to simply deliver lines. She paid attention to the way her character was written and didn't hesitate to speak up when something didn't feel truthful. The writers noticed her instincts. By season 4, episodes like Darlene Fades to Black explored teenage depression in a way network television almost never touched. Her delivery made the storyline feel earned rather than dramatic for its own sake, and it became one of the earliest examples of a major sitcom acknowledging adolescent mental health without turning it into a punchline. That wasn't an accident. Sarah pushed for realism because she understood the difference between entertainment and honesty, and she didn't want the show to fall back on easy answers. As her profile rose, she made a decision that very few teen stars were willing to make in the middle of a hit series. She enrolled at Yale University. From 1993 to 1997, the production adjusted its entire schedule around her academic life, filming her scenes in New York so she could attend classes in Connecticut. She was living two demanding identities at the same time, student and working actor, and refusing to give either one up. That choice showed a clear shift in her priorities. She wasn't trying to extend her fame, she was trying to build a life not controlled by it. Her work outside the sitcom reflected the same mindset. In 1990's Sooty and Simpson, she tackled themes of racism and abuse. In 1992's Poison Ivy, she played a character manipulated into moral confusion instead of another teenager written for laughs. Everything she chose pointed to the same pattern: roles built on complexity, not spectacle. By the late 1990s, audiences saw Darlene as a relatable character, but the investigation into the timeline shows something different. Behind the scenes, Sarah was quietly shaping the version of young womanhood that would become mainstream decades later. Emotionally guarded, multi-layered, realistic, and uninterested in fitting into Hollywood's narrow boxes. She wasn't following trends, she was predicting them, and that is what made her rise significant. It wasn't about sudden fame or breakout success. It was about a young actor turning a sitcom role into a platform for ideas that television wasn't ready for yet, and doing it with a level of control and self-awareness rarely seen in someone her age. The decade she lived in silence. Sarah Gilbert's rise on Roseanne coincided with a private struggle she kept entirely out of public view, and the investigation into this period reveals how much she carried while appearing fully in control. During the early 1990s, when audiences believed she was stepping into adulthood with unusual stability, she was quietly wrestling with feelings she did not have words for. Her relationship with Johnny Galecki, which began as a standard teenage romance, became the moment she realized something in her life did not match the public script surrounding her. Each time they kissed, she felt a sadness she didn't understand, and instead of dismissing it, she tried to make sense of it alone. When she finally told Galecki she thought her reaction was connected to her sexuality, he supported her without hesitation, but support did not erase the fear she lived with. The fear had a clear source. Hollywood in the 1990s did not protect young performers who came out publicly. Sarah understood that the wrong headline at the wrong time could alter the trajectory of her career instantly. She had watched the system long enough to know how quickly the industry rewrote its relationships with actors who no longer fit the version of themselves the public expected. That knowledge, learned during childhood, now became the reason she protected her truth so carefully. As her work on Roseanne expanded, and as she began taking on roles that emphasized emotional realism, her personal life moved in the opposite direction: quiet, compartmentalized, and hidden even from the people who worked beside her each day. During this decade of silence, she entered a relationship with a woman more than 18 years older, someone who was also well known in the industry. The relationship was meaningful, but it existed entirely in private because Sarah believed exposure would harm not only herself, but the people connected to her. And the divide between her public image, a level-headed young actor who seemed untouched by Hollywood's pressure, and her private reality grew wider each year. It was not rebellion or secrecy for its own sake. It was self-preservation. By the time she became the creator and executive producer of The Talk in 2010, she had already built a family with producer Allison Adler and had 2 children, Levi in 2004 and Sawyer in 2007. Yet even then, she still had not said publicly who she was. When CBS prepared to launch The Talk and the press cycle intensified, she made the decision she had spent nearly a decade avoiding. Her coming out statement in 2010 was concise, pragmatic, and stripped of drama. She said she didn't think of herself as in or out, only as who she was. The simplicity of her words hid everything she had navigated to reach that point. What makes this period significant is not the secret itself, but the cost associated with keeping it. For almost 10 years, Sarah Gilbert balanced a rising career, a growing public reputation, and a personal truth she believed could undo both. She later said she was afraid of losing everything she had worked for, and the timeline confirms that fear was not unfounded. The industry was not kind to young LGBTQ+ actors during those years. She survived that environment not by avoiding the truth, but by managing it with precision until she felt strong enough to make it her own. And that turning point, quiet, controlled, and deeply personal, became the moment that redefined her relationship with the industry she had spent her entire life watching from both inside and outside. The collapse that tested everything. When Roseanne returned in 2018, Sara Gilbert was no longer the teenager audiences remembered. She was the architect of the revival, the executive producer who had fought to rebuild the Connor family with a tone that reflected real American struggles rather than nostalgia. But the closer the show moved toward success, the more unstable the environment behind the scenes became. Roseanne Barr's unpredictability was already a concern for writers, producers, and crew members. Outbursts happened without warning. Staff members traded uneasy messages during rehearsals. Sarah, despite being both star and producer, spent much of her time managing the friction instead of celebrating the revival's surge in ratings. The investigation into this period makes one thing clear. The revival was operating on borrowed time. Sarah had pushed for grounded storylines, opioid addiction, financial instability, generational disappointment, because she knew the family's realism was the revival's strongest asset. But she also knew that the entire project depended on Roseanne Barr's behavior, something no one on the production could control. That vulnerability became catastrophic on May 29, 2018, when Roseanne posted a racist tweet targeting Valerie Jarrett at 2:45 in the morning. The tweet went viral within minutes. By the time executives at ABC arrived at their offices, the show that had been the network's biggest success of the year had become an emergency. ABC canceled the series within hours. Wanda Sykes resigned immediately. Disney leadership supported the decision without hesitation. Sarah learned about the cancellation through chaotic conference calls, not private conversations or advance notice. 200 cast and crew members lost their jobs in a single morning, and the production she had spent years helping rebuild collapsed in one day. Her decision to call the tweet abhorrent and to support OBC's cancellation was straightforward for her, but it marked the end of any relationship she still had with Roseanne Barr. Barr later accused Sarah of betrayal, claiming she had destroyed her life and engineered the show's downfall. The accusations grew more intense in interviews, podcasts, and social media posts, placing Sarah in the center of a public conflict she had never sought. Yet the fallout also revealed something that had been building since Sarah's early years in the industry. When the revival was canceled, she moved immediately into problem-solving mode. She met with producers to determine whether anything could be salvaged. She evaluated the loyalty of the cast. She pushed for a version of the show that could continue without its original lead. The result was The Conners, a series that restructured the family around loss, accountability, and survival. It premiered just months after the cancellation and ran for 7 seasons, ultimately becoming one of ABC's most reliable comedies. The scandal tested Sarah in ways the public never saw. She had to protect a production she created, navigate a moral crisis in real time, and absorb the blame from a former mentor whose collapse she could not prevent. But the most revealing detail is how she responded. Instead of retreating, she stepped into leadership at the exact moment the situation demanded clarity. She preserved the work of the cast and crew, stabilized a franchise that had existed since 1988, and chose integrity over loyalty, even though the personal cost was immediate. And when the dust settled, the scandal did not diminish her. It confirmed the role she had been moving toward for decades. Someone who understood that truth has consequences, but silence has greater ones. The producer who forced television to tell the truth. By the time The Conners ended in April 2025, Sara Gilbert had spent nearly 4 decades inside the same fictional family. But the conclusion of the series did not mark a retreat from the industry. Instead, it clarified the role she had been moving toward from the beginning. She had entered Hollywood as a quiet observer, risen as a young actor who valued realism over performance, and matured into a producer who insisted that television reflect the world as it actually was. The end of the Connor storyline simply created space for her to expand that influence. Her decision to leave the talk in 2019 reflected the same instinct toward honesty that defined her entire career. She told the audience she could not balance the demands of producing, acting, and raising 3 children, and she chose to step away while the show was still succeeding. That choice revealed something fundamental about how she saw her own life. She valued presence over visibility, control over momentum, and authenticity over image. Those priorities shaped the next phase of her work. In May 2019, she launched Sarah plus Tom Productions with Tom Werner, returning to a creative partnership that had begun when he cast her as Darlene at 13. The company's mission was straightforward: produce stories that were grounded, emotional, and honest. It was an extension of everything she had already proved she could do. Her personal life reflected that same steadiness. Her separation from Linda Perry in 2019 and their eventual divorce in 2024 did not result in the acrimony often associated with celebrity breakups. They remained close, continued to co-parent their son Rhodes, and spoke publicly about the commitment they maintained to their version of family. For someone who had spent decades protecting her identity, her transparency during this period demonstrated how much the industry had changed and how much she had contributed to that change. Her earlier fears about visibility, which had shaped the silent decade of her youth, no longer defined her. She had become the kind of figure whose presence made it easier for others to live openly. Professionally, she continued to take on work that aligned with her values. Her appearance in Atypical showed her interest in stories centered on neurodiversity and family realism. Her openness to returning as Leslie Winkle in the upcoming Big Bang spin-off indicated that she no longer felt constrained by the industry's expectations or by the roles that had once defined her. She had reached a point where she chose projects based not on image, but on whether they allowed her to contribute something meaningful. When viewed as a complete timeline, her legacy becomes unmistakable. Sarah Gilbert pushed realism into sitcoms before it was common. She brought honest conversations about identity, motherhood, and family dynamics into daytime television. She stabilized one of the most influential sitcom franchises after its most public collapse. And she helped reshape the way LGBTQ+ performers were seen, not through activism alone, but through decades of consistent, intentional work that proved authenticity was not a liability. She did not become a pioneer because she was loud or provocative. She became one because she understood from childhood how stories were constructed, and she refused to let television keep telling the same limited version. Her impact is measured not only in ratings or awards, but in the shift she helped create. A television landscape where honesty is not a risk, diversity is not an afterthought, and identity does not have to be hidden to be protected. And that is the final truth this investigation reveals. Sarah Gilbert did not simply adapt to Hollywood, she altered the way Hollywood tells the truth.